Let us pray. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When I was little, I used to love storms. Like, the bigger, the better, right? Where we lived, you could look through our backyard, which was kind of a big yard, into a big field behind our house, and there's a low-lying horizon. And so you could see the storms coming for a long ways away. And I used to love sitting back in our back porch and looking across and seeing these dark and ominous clouds coming our direction. You know, as the sky would get darker and darker, the thunder and lightning increasingly getting louder and more powerful. The winds would pick up, and I would just get so excited. I loved it. It was awesome. Sometimes I'd even get waken up at night by these storms, right? Huge rains, gigantic storms, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it would wake me up in the middle of the night. And I'd pull up a chair right beside the window so I could watch the show take place. And in the morning, I would go walking through the woods, dying to see big branches or trees knocked down by the storms. I'd run down to the stream at my grandparents' house to see the power of the new flooded stream going over its bed. And, well, when we'd go someplace later that day, I'd beg to go past the places where I know would flood the best, and you'd see the power of the storms. Anyone else like that? I used to love those things. I loved storms when I was a kid. The huge rains, the snowfalls, the gigantic snow where you could barely even get out of your house because it snowed so much. Granted, these sometimes came with a little bit of work for my brother and I, because it was he and I that had to do all the shoveling to get ourselves out the next day. If we had a torrential downpour, it was he and I that would have to go shovel the driveway back so we could get cars up and down. But it wasn't a big deal. I loved those storms when I was growing up. But a funny thing has happened to me as I've gotten older. I don't get nearly as much of a kick out of storms as I used to. I don't find myself happily and joyfully watching to see what carnage happens from my windows any longer. I don't find myself hoping for extra big snowfall or a particularly huge rainstorm or flood any longer. Now, part of that reason, no doubt, is from the trips I've had the opportunity to go on to New Orleans or other places. And I've gotten to see what catastrophic damage looks like and how it changes people's lives. After going to New Orleans and seeing a hurricane rip through the coastal towns, it isn't quite as enjoyable anymore. It's agonizing. Knowing that people's lives are never going to be the same. And same thing goes for the tornadoes that have been on the news over the last couple of months. Nothing cool or fun about those. However, if I am really honest with myself, it isn't those other stories and those other lives that really cause my uncomfortability when storms come around here. It's my own. When my phone beeps in my pocket, telling me that we're about to get severe weather, I get anxious. I never worried before, but now I do. And I worry about whether the wind burst in this storm will pull fascia or roof off my house. I worry about the big trees around our house, the ones that are still left after this week of knocking a couple of them down. I worry about whether those trees are going to fall onto our roof. I worry about the heavy rainfalls seeping into our basement and causing damage to our carpets. I worry about those big snowstorms and the ice that ensues and whether it will damage our gutters or cause damage to our house and our driveway. I have found that as I have gotten older and own my own house, I worry a lot more. And do you know why I worry? Do you know why I'm anxious? I've come to realize, especially this week, thinking about these words from Jesus, that it's because of all this stuff. The house, the yard, the driveway, what's inside the house, our cars. It's all of this stuff. And I have come to realize that I am too attached and attracted to stuff. And I'm so arrogant that I think this is my stuff, and I get anxious and grippy over it. And then I read stories like today's gospel. There's a big crowd gathered around Jesus, right? And this man steps out of the crowd and says to Jesus, or he asks him to intervene on behalf of his family so that his brother will share the family stuff with him. Now clearly this has to be the younger brother, right? Because in Jesus' day, the oldest brother got all this stuff, and he would take care of the younger siblings, just take care of them. He didn't own it though. And so this younger brother, he wants to split the inheritance, not just get taken care of. And so classic Jesus, instead of addressing that actual question, being mediator and negotiator, he addresses the underlying issue, the one that I can relate to, the one that we can relate to, greed. And so Jesus tells a parable. And in this parable, a rich man has tons of produce from his fields. In fact, he has so much that his barns won't hold all the surplus. And so he has this incredibly arrogant and smug conversation with himself. I mean, check this out. Verse 17 says, and he thought to himself, Self, what should I do? For I have no place to store all these crops. And then he says again to himself, I will do this. I will pull down my barns, and I'll build larger barns. And there I will store up all of my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods, and laid up for many years. And so relax, eat, drink, and be merry. And then, in the parable, God goes crazy on this guy for being so greedy. So let me point out a couple of things first. In Jesus' day, estimates are 9 out of 10 people lived in poverty, living day to day. And so it is a major issue that this guy has all this abundance and isn't sharing it. He isn't doing anything to help out his neighbors or anybody else. In fact, when he's having his arrogant and self-absorbed conversation, he even says that he's going to pull down his barns and build larger ones, and then he says, where I will store it up. People are dying of hunger, and he's saving for himself for days down the road. He's intentionally planning to keep his stuff and not share it, all of which is categorically wrong. But this story isn't really about all the other people. It isn't about the ones living in poverty, the 9 out of 10. It isn't about his dying neighbors or those who just simply need help or don't have as much as he does. This story is about the rich man, right? This story is about us, right? It's about us when we hold on to our stuff, our possessions, way too tightly. Most especially our wealth. You see, there's this important line that Jesus begins the whole parable with. Look at verse 16. The land of the rich man produced abundantly. What produced abundantly? The land. Jesus wants to make it very clear that it wasn't the agricultural skills of this guy. It wasn't the brains or his brawn. It wasn't his expensive seeds or the fantastic fertilizer he bought. It wasn't anything he did or contributed. It was the land. It was God. It was the blessing and the giftedness and the grace of God that put this crop yield in his possession. And even still, even in his possessions, in his barns, it is not his. It is God's. We do this, right? We do this all the time. We walk around and we talk it as if it is what we have, our house, our money, our stuff. And we say things like, we talk like it's ours, like it's mine. And we say things like, well, I worked for this, so I deserve it. Or we say things like, my hard work earned this for me. And all the while, we miss out on the fact that our very ability to work, our places of work, our heart to work, our freedom to work, they all come from God. They are not our own. Therefore, what we receive when we work is God's. And we are stewards of God's. But we hold on to this stuff so tight, don't we? And we do insane and irrational things like freaking out in the middle of storms because our roof might lose a couple shingles. And we build walls, more insane things like walls and gates to protect our stuff. We have locks and vaults to keep people out of our stuff. We have security systems in our homes and cars to scare people away. We do everything we can to hold on to our stuff, our money. And then we walk around justifying it by saying things like, I have to protect my stuff. Or we say things like, well, we have to make sure there's enough stuff for all the future people that come around. Won't God do that? Won't God prepare for future people? Who are we to think that it's up to us? You fool! Don't shoot the messenger, that's what Jesus said. You fool. When you act like that, Jesus says, you fool. The truth is we are fools when we do those things. It is foolish. It's insane. My parents taught me when I was growing up that whenever you get paid, the first thing you should think of when you get that money is how much you're going to give back to God. Specifically, give back to God. Not with strings attached, not dictating how you want God to use it, just give it away. Because it's not yours. Give it to the church, my dad would say, or give it to somewhere else. Get your paycheck, or whatever your income looks like when it comes. First thought is giving to God. Because it's God's anyway. Clearly, some people have never thought like that. Now, I've heard many people here at House of Prayer echo those words about being taught when you get your income, first think of God. But I've also heard that there's some of us that have never thought about our money or our giving like that. Every so often when I'm leading worship, particularly during the sermon, I hear that distinctive rip of someone ripping out their check from their checkbook at that moment. Or I've been to other churches. My home church was particularly good about this, and where people are, where the offering plates are this moment to give all of which is already God's back to God, and the offering plates are going around, and you see people like fumbling through their pockets and their wallets or their purses, trying to pull out money at that moment. Like they were completely shocked that the offering plates came around this week. And in my home church, it wasn't the people that just showed up for the first time or were visitors. It was the people that were there every single week, and they had this look of surprise when the offering plates went around. If that's you, that's okay. But I challenge you. Actually, I challenge all of you, every one of us. I challenge myself. Let us stop holding our stuff, and especially our money, so darn tightly, because it is hurting us. Let us confess, as we do at every church beginning, that holding on to our money indeed hurts us. And so be challenged to look at your income not as your income, but as God's income that you are simply caring for. I challenge you to compel yourself to first think about that money as God's. I challenge you to compel yourself to think about how much you can give before you think about how much you can spend. Do this, and I promise you will be a more faithful person. Do this, and you will see the beauty and the strength of your faith that you never knew you had. The more you hold loosely and give away, the more you will have, and the happier you will be. Because we're not meant to store up our stuff. When we do it, it messes us up. It's like an infection in our brains. It messes with our brains. It messes with our hearts. It makes us worry about the worst things possible. And on the other hand, the more we give, the healthier we will be. Give to God's work at church. Don't give to pay electric bills or water bills. Don't give to pay my salary or the salary of anyone else in this church. Don't give to pay for roofs or boilers or mortgages or anything else you can think of at this church. Don't give because you see red numbers in the bulletin or the newsletter. Don't give because the church is in the black. Give to God and this church because it is good for you. Giving is not about the church. It's about you and your relationship with God.